The atmosphere in the office was buzzing, but everything shifted when she walked in. A woman, confident yet condescending, strode through the door, her eyes scanning the room with a judgmental smirk. Her gaze settled on a man in a sharp suit, calmly working at his desk. Assuming he was just another employee, she didn't hesitate to unleash her assumptions, mocking him for his presence there and making rude remarks she thought was subtle. What she didn't know, however, was that this man wasn't just another employee. He was the CEO of the company she was visiting. As her words became more cutting, the man's composure didn't waver. Little did she know, the truth about who he really was would leave her utterly speechless. What happens next is a powerful reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and respect should never be optional. Stay tuned for the twist that changes everything. As the woman glanced around the office, her confidence grew. She loudly commented on the standards of the place, throwing thinly veiled insults about how things must be run. Her tone was sharp, laced with entitlement, and she barely glanced at the man who remained calm and composed at his desk. To her, he was invisible, just another worker beneath her notice. What she didn't realize was that the other employees in the room were watching, exchanging nervous glances, unsure how to respond. They knew who he was, but they also knew his quiet, humble nature. The CEO said nothing, his face calm as she continued her remarks, now directly addressing him, criticizing his demeanor, and even suggesting he looked out of place in such a setting. The tension grew with every word she spoke. The man simply smiled, leaving her, and everyone else, wondering how he'd respond to her unwarranted arrogance. The woman, oblivious to the growing unease around her, leaned in closer to the man's desk. "You know," she said with a condescending smile, "it's rare to see someone like you in a place like this. I suppose everyone needs a chance to prove themselves." Her tone dripped with false encouragement, but her words landed like daggers. Still, the man remained silent, his calm demeanor unwavering. His steady gaze unnerved her for a moment, but she quickly brushed it off. "I mean, really," she continued, glancing around the office, "someone like you could never understand the kind of responsibility it takes to run a place like this." She let out a sharp laugh, confident in her assumption that he was beneath her. Across the room, an employee fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable. Another whispered to a colleague, but no one dared to intervene. The tension was thick, and it was clear they were all waiting for something, anything, to shift the balance. The man finally leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but unreadable. As the woman continued her tirade, she mentioned her impressive connections and how she was there to discuss big business. She made it clear she didn't believe anyone in the room, least of all him, could match her status. But there was something in the CEO's quiet composure that hinted he had the upper hand, even if she didn't know it yet. The room was thick with an uneasy silence, broken only by the woman's voice as she went on about her plans to elevate the company. She made bold suggestions about how things should run and even hinted that the current leadership might not be up to the task. Her words dripped with arrogance, and the employees exchanged more nervous glances, some looking outright alarmed. The man, still seated calmly at his desk, finally leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the polished surface. His expression hadn't changed, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Confidence, maybe even amusement. He asked her a simple question, "And what exactly do you know about the leadership here?" The woman scoffed, waving him off as if the question wasn't worth her time. "Enough to know they're in desperate need of fresh ideas. Someone with real experience," she replied, emphasizing the last words as she crossed her arms. She barely noticed the subtle shift in the room's energy. The employees were no longer just nervous, they were anticipating something. The quiet murmurs stopped entirely, and all eyes were on the man. Even the woman seemed to sense that something was about to happen, but she doubled down, her voice growing louder, more dismissive. "Well," she said with a smug grin, "if the person in charge ever wants to step up and talk, I'd be happy to share my thoughts. In the meantime, maybe you can pass along the message." She tilted her head, her condescension at its peak. The man stood up slowly, his calm presence suddenly commanding the entire room. The silence was deafening as he stepped around the desk, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity that made her falter for the first time. The moment hung heavy in the air, the weight of the truth just seconds away from shattering her assumptions. The woman's confident grin began to waver as the man walked toward her, his calm steps echoing in the now silent office. He stopped just a few feet away, his presence suddenly impossible to ignore. "I appreciate your feedback," he said, his voice steady but carrying an authority that caught her off guard. "But there's something you might want to consider before offering advice about leadership." The woman narrowed her eyes, her discomfort masked by a forced laugh. "And what would that be?" she asked, crossing her arms tighter as if to shield herself from the growing tension. Instead of answering right away, the man glanced around the room, his gaze meeting each employee's. They seemed to sit up straighter, their unease replaced with a quiet pride. Then, turning back to her, he said, "Leadership isn't about assuming you're better than others. It's about understanding, respecting, and lifting the people around you." The woman rolled her eyes, trying to regain control of the situation. "Spare me the lecture," she snapped, though her voice lacked the same confidence. "If you have a point, make it." Just as the words left her mouth, the door behind them opened, and a sharply dressed executive stepped in, carrying a folder. She greeted the man with a respectful nod before addressing him directly. "Sir, the board is ready for your presentation whenever you are." The woman's expression froze, her mind racing to process what she just heard. "Sir," she repeated, her voice quieter now, almost hesitant. Her eyes darted between the executive and the man she had dismissed moments ago, the realization beginning to dawn on her. But the tension wasn't over yet. There was still one more piece of the puzzle she hadn't anticipated. The woman's face flushed as the realization sank in, but she quickly forced a tight smile, trying to recover. "Oh, so you're the CEO," she said, her tone awkwardly shifting to forced politeness. "I had no idea. I must have misunderstood the situation." She laughed nervously, but the room remained tense, the energy far from forgiving. The man tilted his head slightly, his calm demeanor unwavering. "It seems you've misunderstood quite a bit," he replied evenly. His words carried a weight that made her shift uncomfortably. The employees watched in silence, their respect for him palpable, while the woman scrambled to regain control of the conversation. Before she could respond, the executive who had entered earlier cleared her throat. "Actually," she said, addressing the woman directly, "there's something else you should know." She handed the CEO the folder and turned to face the woman. "The board has been reviewing your company's proposal. We found it lacking in key areas, particularly in cultural competency and respect for leadership." The woman's nervous smile faltered completely. "Wait, what?" she stammered. This must be some kind of mistake." The CEO opened the folder, flipping through the pages as he spoke. "Your team came highly recommended, but after today, it's clear there's a serious misalignment in values." He closed the folder and met her stunned gaze. "We take partnerships seriously here, and your behavior today speaks volumes about how you conduct business." The woman's confidence crumbled. I didn't mean any harm," she stuttered, her voice losing its sharp edge. But the damage had been done, and the stakes had just reached a breaking point. What she had assumed was a routine meeting had now turned into a pivotal moment, one she had no control over. The woman stood frozen, her confidence shattered as the weight of her actions sank in. The employees in the room silently watched, their expressions a mix of vindication and relief. The CEO handed the folder back to the executive, his calm gaze never leaving the woman.